Hey everyone, this is Jason Bell. In this episode, I'm at 101 Poker Club just outside of Houston, Texas. I'm playing 1-3 No Limit Hold'em. There is no maximum buy-in, so I buy in for $500. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and here we go. Okay, before we get started, you may be wondering why I don't have close to $500 sitting on the table in front of me. In this first hand, we're actually 2 hours into the session. Why, you may ask? Well, I was 100% card dead from the moment I sat down. Not a single playable hand for 2 solid hours. However, at 101, every time there's a dealer change, there's a PLO double board bomb pot, and as you can see, I didn't fare so well in those hands. Regardless, the playable hold'em hands start now, so let's get into it. In this hand, I'm in the middle position and I look down at pocket kings. Oh yeah. I open for $12 and it folds all the way around to the big blind who makes the call. His range is going to be pretty wide here. He could have anything from pocket jacks all the way down to suited connectors to some broadways. So we are heads up to a flop, which is 8-4-4 rainbow. Flop doesn't get much better than that for pocket kings. The big blind checks and I, of course, am going to put some more money into this pot, so I put out a C bet of $15 and the big blind makes the call. The turn is the 3 of clubs. Big blind checks again, and this time I put out a bet of $40, about a 75% pot size bet. The big blind folds. Not a big pot here, but pretty happy to actually get something at this point and take a pot down. Okay folks, let me preface this hand by saying at this point I was now 3 hours into the session, had only seen one playable hand and had already added on for an additional $200. I was getting a bit impatient and decided to straddle on the button. At 101 when there's a button straddle, the small blind is the first to act, so in this hand I'm on the button and look down at 4 deuce offsuit. Small blind and big blind both fold, the under the gun raises to $12, folds around to the cutoff who calls, and I do something here I definitely don't recommend. I call with 4 deuce offsuit. Yes, patience be damned, I did. We are 3 ways to a flop, which is 4-4-6 rainbow. The under the gun checks, the cutoff checks, and yep, I'm putting more of my poker chips into this pot, so I bet $20. The under the gun calls, and the cutoff folds. We're heads up to a turn, which is the queen of diamonds. The under the gun checks, and this time I decide to go for some value, and I put in a pot size bet of $80. The under the gun thinks about this for a bit, and he ends up folding, so I take this pot down with my 4 deuce offsuit monster of a hand. Heck yeah. Okay, in this hand I'm under the gun and I look down at pocket sevens. This is probably at the low end of opening hands I'll raise from in this position. Here I raise to $12 and it folds around to the button who makes the call. Small blind calls and the big blind folds. So we are 3 ways to a flop, which is 4-6-8 with 2 clubs. Small blind checks and my range is typically going to be pretty strong here in this position. So while I may just have the best hand right now anyways with this board, I'm representing some strength and I put out a C bet of $16. The button folds and the small blind folds as well. Quick hand and a small pot, but glad to take it down. In this hand, I'm in the small blind and I look down at pocket queens. The under the gun limps, the middle position player limps, the hijack limps, and the cutoff raises to $20. The button folds and I'm definitely bumping this one up, so I 3 bet to $65. The limpers all get out of the way and the cutoff makes the call. Because he just called my raise, it's very likely he doesn't have aces or kings here. Possibly he has ace king or some other suited broadways. So we are heads up to a flop, which is 10-9-2 rainbow. I decided to take a more aggressive route and bet $100, and the cutoff quickly calls here. So this is telling me it's likely he's on a draw and possibly has something like queen jack suited maybe? The turn is the 4 of clubs. This time I bet down a bit. Recently I've been putting in pot sized turn bets and wanted to change things up, so I bet $125. Cutoff goes in the tank for a bit, but ends up folding. Decent sized pot here this time around, so I'll take it. Okay, in this hand I'm in the big blind and I look down at the best pre-flop hand in poker, pocket aces. Cutoff limps, the button limps, the small blind completes, and I'm 100% raising this one up, so I put in an additional $20 to make it $23. Cutoff calls, the button calls, and the small blind calls as well. Glad they could build up the pot for me, but need to proceed cautiously as it's very multi-way, and I actually tell myself not to get glued to these things. Aces get cracked more often in multi-way pots than heads up for sure. So we are 4 ways to a flop, which is 6-deuce-3 with 2 spades. Small blind checks, and I've been flopping pretty well so far with my premiums this session, so I put out a C bet of $60. Cutoff calls, and the button and small blind both fold. I'm thinking it's possible the cutoff has something like ace-6 or possibly 6-7 suited. The turn is the king of diamonds. This This time I go ahead and put out a pot-sized bet of $200. Think this was a bit much for this guy as he folded pretty quickly here. Probably should have bet down a bit if he did have sixes, but I take another one down, and again, another decent sized pot here. In this hand, I'm on the button and I look down at Queen 10 offsuit. Folds around to me and I raise this one up to $12. Small blind makes the call and the big blind folds. We're heads up to a flop, which is King 2 7 rainbow. Small blind checks, and this is a pretty dry board. Odds are he didn't hit this king, so I see bet for $12, and he ends up making the call. The turn is the ace of clubs. Small blind checks, and as he called my c bet on a very dry board, I check as well, and I'm pretty much giving up at this point. The river is the king of hearts. This time the small blind bets $12, and I couldn't fold quick enough. Honestly, he could have bet $3, and I would have folded here. Okay, in this hand, I'm in the cutoff position, and I look down at pocket sixes. There's a $6 button straddle on. The small blind and big blind both fold. The middle position player calls the $6 straddle. I call the $6, and the button thinks about this for a bit and puts in a raise to $21. The middle position player calls, and I make the call as well. Hope to do some set mining here. So we are 3 ways to a flop, which is 6-10 queen with 2 hearts. All right, I hit my set, and we are good to go. The middle position player checks. I check to the aggressor, and the button checks as well. At this point, I'm thinking the button has something like ace king or pocket jacks, something of that nature. The turn is the 8 of clubs. The middle position player checks, and it's time to start putting some money into this pot, so I put in a bet of $30. However, the button puts in a raise to $75. This is kind of confusing here. I don't think he would have raised pre-flop with Jack 9 or 7-9, maybe Queen 10 suited. The middle position player folds, and this bet just doesn't make sense to me. Does he have pocket 8s maybe? I put in a confused call here. The river is the 8 of spades, so now it's much less likely he has pocket 8s here. I'm thinking at this point he has to have Queen 10 suited and raised after the turn, as he didn't want anyone catching a straight or flush. Or it's possible he actually did raise pre-flop with Jack 9 and has a straight, or he's just flat out bluffing. So I put in a bet of $200 and actually didn't see that he had only $76 remaining. He instantly calls. I show my boat and he shows pocket 10s for the better boat. Man, he disguised this one pretty well on the flop and had me crushed the whole time. This one was a gut wrencher. Not sure I would have played this hand any differently here. Would have felt a bit nitty to fold to that raise on the turn. In this hand, I'm in the hijack position, and I look down at ace-queen offsuit. The under the gun raises to $15. It folds to me, and this is a good spot to 3-bet, so that's what I do. I put in a raise to $45. Folds around to the big blind and makes the call, and the under the gun player calls as well. So we've got a pot brewing here. We're 3 ways to a flop, which is 8-2 queen with 2 clubs. The big blind and under the gun players both check. I've got top, so I put in a bet of $75, which is a little over half the pot. The big blind makes a quick call and the under the gun folds. Because the big blind called so quickly, I'm thinking he's definitely on a flush draw here. Could have something like ace 10 of clubs or king jack. The turn is the 8 of hearts. The big blind checks and I bet down a bit and put out $125. Big blind thinks about this for a bit and ends up folding, so I take this decent sized pot down. Okay, in this hand, I'm in the big blind, and I look down at King 10 offsuit. The under the gun limps, the hijack limps, the small blind completes, and I make the check here. Not that good of a hand to put in a raise, so we're multi-way into a flop, which is King 5-5 rainbow. Small blind checks, and this time I take a bit more of an aggressive route and bet $15. I generally don't bet into multiple opponents like this unless I have a pretty nutted hand. It's definitely not nutted here, but wanted to change things up a bit and also get a feeling as to where I was at. Well, the under the gun calls, the hijack calls, and the small blind calls. Okay, so now I'm thinking that someone's got to have a better king than I do. The turn is the 10 of hearts. All right, so now I've upgraded to a better 2 pair. The small blind checks, and this time I check for a bit of deception. The under the gun checks as well. However, the hijack bets $30 here. Small blind calls the $30. I make the call, and the under the gun player folds. At this point, I'm thinking one player could have limped with king queen offsuit, or has something like king jack or king 9, and the other could have something like ace 5. So I'm tad worried at this point about those 5s. The river is the 4 of diamonds. Small blind checks, I check, still worried about those 5s, and the hijack bets $50. Small blind calls, and this is such a small bet in relation to the pot. I end up making the call, hoping both players have a king, and of course the hijack turns over ace 5 offsuit and takes this one down. I end up mucking, and the small blind does as well. A little frustrated at myself here for calling, but that small bet size is what got me here. In this hand, I'm under the gun, and I look down at ace-jack offsuit. I put in 3 red chips, but announce a bet of $12. The guy to my left folds, but gives me some change. Folds to the cutoff, who calls the $12, and the remaining players fold. So the cutoff and I are heads up to a flop, which is 4-5-4 with 2 hearts. I c-bet for $12 with my 2 overs, and the cutoff makes the call. The turn is the 8 of clubs. This time I slow down a bit and make the check. However, the cutoff puts in a quick bet of $25. I didn't see how quickly he bet here, and had I seen it, would have probably thought he was on a flush draw. In hindsight, I probably could have peeled one off here. However, it's certainly possible he has something like ace 4 or ace 5 here, which was certainly on my mind from the previous hand, so I end up making the fold. In this hand, I started the video a bit late, but I'm in the cutoff position and I look down at ace 10 of clubs. The low jack limps, I raise this one up to $15. The button calls and it folds back around to the low jack, who makes the call as well. So we're 3 ways to a flop, which is 9-4-5 with 2 clubs. Alright, I'm sitting pretty good here. The low jack checks and I put out a C bet of $15. The button makes the call and the low jack folds. At this point, I'm thinking the button has a couple of overs as well, or possibly has hit that 9 with something like 9-10 suited, or maybe ace 9. The turn is the 8 of spades. I still have some overs and a nut flush draw, so I put out a bet of $30 and the button makes the call. Now, I don't think he's got 6-7 here, or he likely would have raised. The river is the 10 of spades, so now this improved me to top, but the backdoor spade draw got there. I down bet a bit to $50 with my top, and the button thinks about this for a while, so I think I'm pretty good at this point. He ends up announcing that he folds and he ends up showing me king jack of clubs. Now, I never do this and our table was about to break, but I couldn't help it. I show him my ace 10 of clubs and he was like, oh man, I would have been going home if a club hit there on the turn or the river. Fun end to this hand, and would have been great if a club did hit, but glad to take this one down. Okay, now I'm at a new table. As you can see, I prefer the positions on the ends of the table so you can get a better viewpoint, but was unable to here, so I apologize about that. In this hand, I'm in the hijack position, and I look down at pocket queens, both of the red variety. The middle position player opens for $16, and I'm definitely putting some more money into this pot, so I 3-bet to $50. The button makes the call, and the middle position player calls as well. So we're 3 ways to a flop, which is 4-2-8 with 2 diamonds. The middle position player checks, and I put out a $75 C-bet here with my overpair. The button folds, and the middle position player makes the call. Pot's brewing here, just over $300. The turn is the 9 of clubs. The middle position player checks, and now I put in a heftier bet of $150, and the middle position player makes the call again. This is starting to worry me a bit that he has a possible set here. I haven't been at this table long enough yet to get any information on this guy. The river is the king of hearts. The middle position player checks, and I check as well. I show my queens, and he shows me pocket 10s, and I take this one down. Nice sized pot here of just over $600. Okay, folks, this hand is about 10 minutes later. I'm on the button, and I look down at, yep, pocket queens again, and yep, both of them red. The under the gun raises to $15. The hijack calls, the cutoff calls, and of course I'm bumping this one up. So I raise to $75. The under the gun makes the call, and both the hijack and cutoff players fold. Given the under the gun just called here, it's likely he won't have aces or kings. So we're heads up to a flop, which is king 5 ace, all hearts. Alright, I've got a nut flush draw here, but the under the gun could certainly have an ace or a king, or ace king for that matter. The under the gun checks, and I think I make a mistake here. I check as well, worried a bit about that ace and king on the board. The turn is the jack of clubs. The under the gun checks again, so now I'm getting a bit more certain he doesn't have an ace or king, but for some reason I check as well, thinking I get to see a river card for free and potentially make my flush. The river is the 5 of clubs. The under the gun checks, and I check again, yet another mistake on this hand. I show my queens, and he shows pocket 10s. I guess it's likely he would have folded had I bet on any street at this point, so in the long run it really didn't matter, but I probably should have bet, that's for sure. Okay folks, this is the very next hand. I'm in the cutoff position and I look down at pocket aces. The low jack opens for $10, the hijack makes the call, and yep, I'm bumping this one up, so I raise to $40 here. Both the low jack and hijack make the call. For 3 ways to a flop, which is 4-3 ace with 2 clubs. Heck yeah, I hit top set here. The low jack checks, the hijack checks, and I put in about a half pot bet of $60, and both players make the call. The heck, what could they have here? Possibly a set themselves? The turn is the 6 of spades. Both players check, and I put out a bet of $150. Similar to the pocket queens hand from a bit ago. This time the low jack raises all in for $728. What in the world? What's also crazy is the hijack thinks about calling for a solid minute, but he ends up folding. I of course am going to make the call here. I'm thinking at this point he definitely has to have a set, or maybe 2 pair at worst, with an ace of course. No way he called my raises with 5-7. I make the call. The river's the king of spades. I show my aces, and the low jack does in fact show 5-7 of clubs for the turn straight. Wow, truly unbelievable. This is a gut check. I had just gotten to my high point in the session, and the very next hand I lose over $800. I think at this point the only thing I could have done better was possibly raise a bit bigger pre-flop. Instead of $40, maybe something like $60. But if someone's calling 40, With 5-7, why wouldn't they call $60 or $75 as well? I'm pretty rattled at this point and decide to get up and end the session here. Not really a good idea for me to stick around and continue playing in this state of mind.